And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here?
It's time for How Did I Get Here? And now here are your hosts,
All right. Hello, I'm Johnny. I'm your host. Welcome to the show. This is a different kind of episode of How Did I Get Here? My friend James Robinson, musician here in town, called me up earlier this week and told me that I should probably sit down and start talking to some of my African-American musical friends and talk about their experience being black, not just in the music business, but in America, in a chance to start listening and learning about the experience firsthand, to understand systemic racism and why it has to be eradicated. I've gotten a chance to sit down and talk to some people. I want to thank James for suggesting that I do this and kind of pushing me to do this. And I wanted to do something, but I also knew that I didn't know very much. So James's suggestion was that I start off by just listening and understanding, you know? So that's what I'm trying to do. Today's episode is called Black is the Apex, and my guest is musician, songwriter, singer, drummer, entrepreneur, manager, raconteur, Bevis Griffin. Bevis Griffin is an old friend of mine. He joined me for episode 59 way back in 2012. I'll put a link to that episode. It's a very long episode, but Bevis tells us his whole musical journey. I'll put that link in the body of the text of this podcast. Anyway, I just sat down and talked to Bevis. He was here for almost a couple of hours. This is a good long conversation. When Bevis agreed to do this show, he sent me some links to some documentaries that I found on Amazon, and I'm going to suggest those to you right now. One of them is called Out of Darkness. The other one is called Black Power Mixtape. There's another one called I Am Not Your Negro. Those are three documentaries you can get started just watching. There are a ton of books. Bevis didn't recommend a lot of books, but you can go back and listen to my conversation with James Robinson. He suggested a lot of books, and I'll be talking to Jonathan Horseman next week. All right? So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with my dear friend, Bevis Griffin. So, as somebody who was there through the civil rights protests and everything since then, what has the last couple of weeks said to you?
That change is glacial.
Moves very slowly.
Until there's an accelerant. And the accelerant is consciousness.
Yeah. Let me just get this up a little bit. All right. What's different about this particular last couple of weeks do you feel is different than every other time? Do you feel like it's
a confluence of things, and primarily technology is the thing that's at the top of my list, you know, as far as being the accelerating factor.
Yeah.
Right? That the fact that everybody can get the message simultaneously. Right? And the message that they got was so egregiously dark that it resonated at a personal core, right? Because, you know, I usually will kind of like shadow box on Facebook every day, the way that older people, you know, back in the 50s used to do crossword puzzles, you know, just to kind of stimulate your synapse and get your little motor running, you know.
Yeah.
I try not to like just delve in Facebook habitually throughout the course of the day because it's just become so politically, you know, challenging. it becomes so counterproductive, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a Tower of Babel, right?
Right. No one's
But
really
in this
listening.
case, when I experienced the murder of George Floyd in real time on television, because I'm a news junkie, right? And I always have been a news junkie, just simply because as a songwriter, that's where I look for sources of inspiration for subject matter. You know what I mean? It's like that's the feeding ground.
Mhm.
And there's so much news that if you're not early, you're late.
Yeah.
So, going back to my point, it hit me with the same gravitas as the explosions at 9/11.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And as a former New Yorker, I can never forget the way I felt the instant that I saw that on the Today Show.
Right.
Right, like it's the same way that I felt when I was, in the third or fourth grade, and they announced the assassination of John F. Kennedy on the loudspeaker at school. It's kind of like, that's unbelievable, right? And it's like it was the same level of emotional devastation, right? Because I'm not a crier per se, but I was fighting back tears, observing this grown man, literally being murdered in cold blood in the company of 4 other officers with no reflexive indication for, the humanity or the well-being of this individual as a human. I mean, look, I'm really acclimated to the concept of like horror shows and science fiction, and like I'm no snowflake like when it comes to like violence, right? Like,
Yeah.
but there's a certain point to where something becomes so heinous, it's like I wasn't even looking at police officers. I felt like I was looking at a demon.
Yeah. You were.
And it just devastated me,
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, the first thing that I could compose in my mind to go online to
Express
report,
yourself. Yeah.
to just try to release something,
Yeah.
was, how would you feel if this were your father or your brother or your son or your nephew? And I just kind of went down a whole genealogy,
Yeah. The whole family tree.
whole genealogical line of references to try to find some sort of touch point, right? Because if you just transpose that individual's life against anyone in your nuclear family, and then you just imagine for a minute, let alone 8 minutes and 46 seconds, right, that this was your loved one under that assault, how would you feel? What would you do? And the resounding response was, spectacular, right? Because the entire ocean of humanity rose to the occasion almost simultaneously against the outrage that the assailant had not been immediately arrested. That this was basically going to be considered business as usual. Episode, 10,005. Right? So, at a humanistic level, your first instinct is, I hate every fucking cop in the world at face value. I don't have any conversational latitude for good cop versus bad cop because I saw 3 other cops as accomplices to this guy's murder. That means if you could say, well, there's only 1 out of 1,000, whatever the party line is from the Justice Department, right? Like maybe there's only 1 rogue cop out of 1,000. Well, that mathematical equation didn't hold up in this particular instance. And then it becomes more exacerbated by the fact that this ain't the first time I've seen this shit. As a matter of fact, this is the 3rd time that I've seen this in a month. Ahmaud Arbery, put me in a mindset to where it's like, oh my God, they just literally assassinated this dude over trespassing at best. Oh, wait a minute. Who are they? These motherfuckers are not even cops. Right? This is like some straight up vigilante, get a rope, let's lynch this motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? Like, excuse my language. I want to try to refrain from that if I can do, but I don't feel like it. You know what I mean? It's like there's no reason for me to tippy toe around my feelings right now.
There's no need to. It's weird. The first time I ever experienced that feeling, sort of that sort of injustice, and was awoken to it. I think I was 13 years old, and I was watching The Great Santini. Do you remember that movie?
Oh yeah.
Remember the guy that stuttered?
Oh yeah.
And then they went after
Duma.
Duma. That's right.
The guy with the dogs.
Duma.
Right.
Yeah. That's what they would do to him.
Yeah.
That's a sight that never left me. That scene never. I've only seen that movie twice. I've not seen it since I was a teenager, and I still remember that scene vividly.
No, it was a powerful film on multiple levels. But just to stay on topic,
yes.
The idea was that compounded with the Breonna Taylor's assault, which again, here we go again. The conversation becomes, what happened to the protect and serve part?
Right. Or protect and serve who?
Protect and serve, period. You understand what I'm saying? Because, the idea was that another case of mistaken identity, when I still theoretically have a psychic scar and an open wound from the incident in Dallas, where that female officer brazenly went into this quote-unquote wrong apartment thinking that she was being home invaded. And instead of her evacuating the premises and calling for help, she just opens up and unloads on a man sitting in his own goddamn house.
Yeah. You
know what I'm saying? It's like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, we have to backtrack to, 2016, 2015, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, I would have thought Tamar Rice would have set the world on fire. When you got a squadron of police that roll up on a child that's playing with a toy gun, and they think that that's grounds to open fire on a child, that in itself should have become incendiary. And what it does to you psychically is that it just fans a flame that's been burning in you since you were old enough to understand red light, green light.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your mother and your kindergarten teachers or your day school teachers, they teach you how to cross the street.
Yeah.
Right? Red means stop. Green means go.
Yeah.
Don't walk on the red light because A, you could get hit. B, you might get a ticket.
Yeah.
Right? And just the whole construct of what is your relationship to the police department? Well, if I can tell you in my case that growing up in South Central Los Angeles, being born in 1953, pre-civil rights movement, being an innocent child, oblivious, to the consternation that my parents may have been going through prior to that point, right? I've interviewed with you before, and I think I told you before, it's like my parents were very wise because they never embedded a degree of like social anxiety in my psyche with regard to race, because they came from the South, and my dad came from the deep South, came from Natchez, Mississippi, as the youngest of 11 children, and he was born in the 30s when the Jim Crow lynchings were like commonplace, like daily, right?
Yeah.
Like that was the penalty.
Yeah.
For being caught alone in kangaroo court situations to where, 2 or 3 or 4 white people were the judge and the jury.
Yeah.
Right? He was totally indoctrinated to that. But he never gave me that fear, paranoia, resentment, hatred, and anxiety towards white people.
Yeah. Can I quickly stop you there?
Sure.
And interject with one of the documentaries that I watched, and one that I highly recommend, Out of Darkness.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lengthy 3-part documentary all in one thing, and there's a lot of the talk about that, about the DNA, like the fact that you live under trauma for so long. It's like the race-based traumatic stress model, and how that's passed along. You know what I'm talking about.
Of course.
You recommended the movie to me. Of course, you know what I'm talking about. So you're saying that your dad didn't never pass that along to you, even verbally, but they did have the talk. There's also the part in that documentary where they talk about how
once I got old enough to ride a bike,
yeah,
then that would come into conversations like, well, actually, once I got old enough to roller skate around the block, right? That's when that's when that sort
once
of conversation.
Once you were able to get out of their sight, and who knows what the hell was going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, for some people listening, that's a thing that I never encountered, or obviously never encountered. No one ever had the talk with me, but I never knew about it until I saw this. And I've talked to some of my friends since then, over the last couple of days, and when you bring it up, they laugh. They're like, "Of course, you have to have the talk with your kid." Can you tell people what that talk is?
Well, in my era, it was more so predicated on the fact that cops basically rolled like a goon squad, against African Americans.
And famously in South Central LA.
Famously in South Central LA, they would basically accost, what I call vulnerable subjects to torture and intimidation for sport. Because the police chief of the police department in that era, had a deeply racist agenda, right? In other words, it was permitted. In other words, there was no repercussions, right? So if you filed a grievance for whatever they charge, like illicit use of force, unnecessary or excessive use of force. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That was just tissue paper. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't going anyplace, right? And among the youngsters, it wasn't uncommon for them, to basically just chase us around for sport. Like, let's go see if we can catch one. Because they knew we would run, right?
Of course.
Right? And it was literally like you're running for your life. It's not necessarily that they were going to kill you, right? But they would beat you, so badly that, you could have been killed. And leave you where they found you. You know what I'm saying? So that there wasn't any, any witnesses. It was always just kind of let's just drag him into a dark alley someplace. I lived in an area that was logistically close to the Goodyear rubber plant, right where the blimp was housed in a hangar off of Florence and Central Avenue. Mm-hmm. So the Goodyear blimp used to depart from the hangar and just coast over my house on its like daily rounds,
Yeah.
you know. And that was one of my fondest childhood memories because it's like this big, magnificent machine.
Very
just-
exciting to see the blimp when we were kids. We didn't have
Right.
cell phones or anything like that. Yeah, yeah, I know exactly the feeling. Yeah, it's the blimp. Yeah, dude, totally.
Well, you know, that tire plant was massive.
Yeah.
You know, it was as big as an airport. You know what I mean? And there was all sorts of like, you know, loading docks and tributaries, and that's where the police would basically just kind of patrol and hang out and fuck around, and that's where they would kind of like take you to do their dirty work. You know what I mean? It was kind of like when you would hear about the instances of like police brutality in Johannesburg during the apartheid, you know,
Yeah.
eras, you know, and they, you know, the equivalent of taking you into a secret room, you
Yeah.
know, to quote unquote interrogate you, which just meant that you were going to be tortured or unmercifully assaulted, you know what I'm saying, until you admitted to something that you didn't do.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But can I just quickly also interject in here is that in the conversation that we're having about systemic racism, the fact that these racist individuals did these things says one thing, but what really speaks volumes is that above them there's a system that allows it.
Exactly.
All right, go ahead. Sorry. I just want to make sure that that's clear because I feel like there's a thing where people are mixing up systemic racism with racist people, and the fact is that there's you're not going to eradicate racist people from any kind of thing, but you can eradicate it from the system, and therefore that will change the dialogue.
Well, let's just get philosophical for a minute.
Sure.
You know, I mean, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, right? And you make a decision to maintain a racist mentality, right? It's one thing for you to tell me that a stove is hot,
Right.
but until I put my finger on it and get the burn for myself, I don't know that to
Right.
be true, right?
Right.
So when an individual, be it your mother, father, uncle, aunt, next door neighbor, you know, tells you that there's something egregiously wrong with affiliating with a black person, you'd have to be an idiot not to test it.
Yeah.
You feel me?
Exactly.
Now, I can say this, it could be exacerbated if your first experience, you know, with an alien culture is not positive. You know, if the first black person you see spits on you, that's going to leave a very bad taste in your mouth about black people in general. The same way that if I move up to a beehive or a hornet's nest and I get the shit stung out of me, I'm going to try to avoid them at all costs because it just was not a positive first experience, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, you know, if you first time you touch or get a butterfly to land on you and you realize that they don't bite, well then you don't have no problem with butterflies,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if the first white people that I met when I was a child were nice, they lived in my block. In our previous interview, I told you South Central Los Angeles was culturally diverse by and large before the Watts riot in 1965. And so I had a Caucasian family living to my right, and an African American family living to my left, and an Asian family across the street, Hispanic family down the street. And by the time we were old enough to go to first grade, second grade, third grade, it was, you know, it was a rainbow coalition of kids. It wasn't just all black kids speckled with a couple of white kids here. I mean, it was fairly well balanced. Now, I don't know if that was just, you know, the luck of the draw with my particular neighborhood, right? Because obviously there were some districts that were more densely black populated than others. Like when you go further south, like to
In
Watts,
yeah.
you know, that's a different thing. But it's also a different economic bracket, right? Like there was a higher proliferation of projects in Watts, right? So it was a lower income strata. And, you know, I told you my dad was an entrepreneur, owned a couple of independent barbershops,
Yeah.
and a gambling enterprise
Yeah.
in between those two things.
Yeah.
So we weren't rich. I wasn't a rich kid or anything like that, but I certainly didn't want for anything. You
Okay.
know, I had every creature comfort imaginable. So I felt like we were, at the very least, middle class. You know what I mean? Because my parents had 2 cars in the driveway at all times. I never missed a meal. I always wore new clothes every school season. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was good, and my childhood was so idyllic, meaning just like so joyful, right? Because of the time period that I was growing up.
Yeah.
1953. By the time I'm 5, like rock and roll is in full bloom.
Yeah.
My parents were still young, so they were into it.
Yeah.
And LA was just popping, sizzling with the American Bandstand and Al Jarvis show. And you could come home after school and see rock and roll like right away. You didn't have to wait.
Yeah.
You didn't have to wait. You could come home right away, and it was like a sock hop. And then you watch Superman, and then you watch Popeye, and then you watch Felix the Cat. You know what I'm saying? It's like all this great stuff was just popping up, right?
Yeah.
And these were the days of 3 channels, Johnny. You think about it.
Oh,
it's
I remember it.
It's like theoretically, like less was more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like we couldn't have been happier with those 3 damn channels.
Yeah, and you couldn't miss your thing because there was no way to see it again.
Nope, there wasn't no missing it. And
you had to hold your pee till the commercials.
And the interesting thing about it was that it's just the way that race was just portrayed and codified, even in media during those times, was so interesting because it's the whole idea. They talk about it in Outer Darkness. Like the whole machination of how Hollywood would basically kind of like marginalize, the black characterizations. Until, the early 60s when Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte really kind of like came into prominence, you know what I'm saying? Prior to that point,
right,
all Negroes on TV were in subservient roles, one of the most popular was like Rochester on the Jack Benny show. Right? Because he would talk shit to Jack Benny. Right. Yeah. Right? But this was also the days when the original Amos and Andy TV show used to be on, with the Kingfish and Sapphire, you know what I'm saying? It was kind of like an all in the family thing. And it used to be like the most popular radio show before TV. Right. But it was all portrayed by white people imitating black people. Right. You know what I mean? The same thing that Jimmy Fallon was having a nervous breakdown over a few days ago because he did a skit at one point previously on Saturday Night Live where he imitated Chris Rock in blackface.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Google it. He got caught, in the aftermath of that, like because people took what I call a second look. You know what I mean? And just like where you started to see the instances where any of these politicians that were caught during their fraternity days, dressed in blackface.
Why is that a fraternity thing? That's what I don't understand. Like that's just the weirdest thing.
Because fraternities are stupid, and kids in fraternities are stupid people as a rule. You know what I mean? They're just, you're young. I'm 67 now, so I have a good time sounding like grandpa. Although I'm still hipper than most of the kids that I know that are 20 or 21 years old. You know what I mean? Like they don't know the shit that I know. Right. You know what I mean? They haven't been to places I've been. They don't know the people I've met. Yeah. And they haven't seen the things that I've seen. Right. So, I mean, if I go on a rare occasion, if I ever decide to go back to a nightclub, you know what I mean? Yeah. I usually just hold court. Right.
Yeah. Oh, I've been there with you.
Yeah. And I enjoy it because that's my point. Yeah. As dark as all of these recent days have been, the encouraging factor is that you just saw this magnanimous outpouring of love, compassion, and empathy, from every facet of the racial spectrum, and I say even the socioeconomic spectrum for that matter, Ellen DeGeneres was talking on her show day before yesterday, and it was just really heart-wrenching, because she's one of the few, individuals in mainstream media that actually has a story that resonates with the black community at a very, very, deep level, because she's so magnanimous. She's so generous, with her intent, to mollify her success, which is massive,
Right.
and reconcile that with the impact to people in need, right? And I don't think that she does it out of a sense of guilt. I think she gets a joy out of it, the way that I would. If, like, I'd be the guy that you would love to see me win $100 million in the lottery. You would love that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because everybody within my
In your
orbit,
sphere,
would be celebrating
with you. Yeah.
We would all be good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you can't take it with you.
Yeah.
You can't drive more than one car at a time.
Right.
You can't live in more than one house at a time.
Yeah.
And then how can you have 5 houses when you see people with no home?
Yeah.
How could you sleep at night? I mean, people do it. I don't get it. But that's another aspect of the conversation that we're having right now.
Yeah.
The egregious racial disparity is predicated on the egregious financial disparity that's basically been set in motion ever since the development of the Emancipation Proclamation. Mm-hmm. The first thing that the government really should have done, if they really wanted to put black people in a stable economic setting, was to fulfill their promise and give them the land and give them the 40 acres that they promised. You know what I'm saying? At the beginning of the Emancipation Proclamation, right? I mean, the 13th Amendment basically says that it's basically illegal to have a person in servitude in bondage, right? Like, that's against the law. That's what the 13th Amendment is about. But then they didn't waste any time going into fine print saying, unless you're a criminal. If you become a prisoner, then you can work for free until your last dying breath, right? So there's a documentary that I want you to see and publicize, and I will continue to feed you stems, you know what I'm saying, and reams of information that you can process in your own personal time, in your own personal space.
Yeah. Real quick, I got to tell you that just from the last couple of days, yesterday when I turned on Amazon, I took a photo of it because I was going to send it to you and I forgot. The very first sort of like line of things,
it's all black.
Is black. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yes.
They all got woke.
Yeah.
The same time.
I thought it was just me that had triggered it in my own algorithm. No. Okay.
No.
Because every documentary you told me about was on there.
No, they position but see, that's the difference, right? Like, I had to dig for mine.
Yeah. Like,
I had to kind of like go into specific
I've
searches.
got a guide.
You know what I mean?
I got a Sherpa.
But I'm just saying, I mean, my point is I jumped on Amazon Prime because I wanted to see Out of Darkness.
Yeah.
I became aware of it because I'm always on Google, like, searching for, vectors, right? It's like my guru is Dr. Cornel West. I mean, he's my new Jimi Hendrix, right? Like, if I could get the benefit of another 40 years on the planet, I would aspire to be like 1/10 of the intellectual and public servant.
What was the thing
that he is?
Said that I was? I didn't hear the whole thing because you sent it to me like an hour before the thing.
You will,
but I definitely will, and I've already shared it with a couple of friends of mine. At the very beginning of it, he says that America praises intelligence but fears intellect.
That's true. He's also a big.
You can be smart, but don't be too informed.
Well, he's a big advocate of this. He uses a term that I love, and I've really embraced it. And it's called intellectual humility. He uses a catchphrase that says, "Let the phones be smart. You should be wise."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, the idea of being intellectually aggressive or intellectually self-aggrandizing cancels out dialogue because you know everything. Right? You and I can't talk because I know it all. Right? And once I start making you wrong, right, we disintegrate communication.
Yeah.
Right? The only way that, I'll put it this way, if a little kid 3 years old comes up to me and goes like, "Hey, that shit is smoking." If I've got any sense at all, I should turn around for a minute and look and see what he's talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he might be trying to save my life. You dig what I mean?
Yeah.
If I'm just going, get away from me, kid, you bother me.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Next thing you know, I done lost the real estate.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, about economy and real estate, because that's part of the systemic racism that I feel like I've learned. I actually went on, I didn't watch I Am Your Negro, but I did watch a documentary that was suggested right afterwards, which is
Did
called...
you see Black Power mixtape?
Of course, yeah. Right after Black Power mixtape, it's called The Black Miami.
That's actually on my list.
And I was born there.
That's your turf.
That's my turf. And I was there one of the summers of one of the riots.
Oh.
It's either I can't remember if it's the Liberty City or maybe I was there for both. I don't know.
Okay.
But I do remember that going down. But what I learned from that one is how the redlining, because they talk about how, like, in South Florida, the black neighborhoods were designed and put in the northwest quadrant of the city so that the black people were in one place, and they had curfews. They couldn't leave after 7 or whatever. And in Overtown was one of them. And it was placed there so that they were kept in a one neighborhood, but then also not let to move too far because they needed them to be able to get to work on time. They compartmentalized them because they needed them to build the city. And then what ended up happening is that with the redlining, then these become, you know what I'm talking about, where they put a neighborhood, and then it's not like the black neighborhoods, like the businesses aren't owned by the people who live in the neighborhood.
Right.
So economically, the neighborhood can never flourish because the money is always leaving.
Exactly.
And never coming in.
Exactly. And that's by design.
Yes, that is by design. That is by design. And that's the system that people are talking about that needs to be dismantled and reconstructed in a way that's fair for everyone.
And see, to be fair, this is why everyone is taking what I call a second hard look at, the teachings of, or the lectures of, like, Malcolm X, right?
Yeah.
See, here's the thing. Let's get into this aspect,
Okay.
because this is important to me. The Nation of Islam, the ascension of the Nation of Islam, became like a threat to the government of the United States of America instantly.
Yeah.
Right. Elijah Muhammad was wise insofar as he saw, like, the charismatic value in his mentee, Malcolm X, right? Because he basically mentored Malcolm X while Malcolm X was still in prison,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's a similarity here insofar as we've been quarantined, right? When we've been in isolation and quarantine, you could choose to kind of anesthetize yourself, inebriate yourself, keep yourself smoked out, drunk. I doubt that you want to do a lot of blow. You know what I mean? Since you can't go out.
It'd be the worst feeling in the world.
My point is,
Sorry.
you can detach.
Yeah.
You feel what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or
I've done my fair share.
Or you can do, as myself, like, I haven't had a drink since Christmas Eve, right? And I think that my clarity and my sobriety is actually crystallized, like, my focus on negotiating through the pandemic crisis, even before this came up. And so I've literally been in hardcore deep study mode for the past year, right? Because I kind of made a conscientious decision to, like, devote my soul to Christ, right? And because once I hit 65, it's like tick-tock, the clock is running, right? It's like, where do you want to be on that final hour, right? Like, where do you want to be with your soul?
Getting right with God, so to speak.
Yeah. And I'm not saying this because I'm trying to beat the clock, right? But it's an epiphany, so to speak. Like, like my Christ mind, my Christ mind spoke to me.
Yeah.
You feel what I'm saying?
I do.
And it's kind of like, if you have any sensibility about it, and I'm not anti agnosticism. I understand it from a pragmatic standpoint. How, like, look, these things that you're reading about in these scriptures, I don't know that these are necessarily practical, right? Like, I don't necessarily see where all of this applies to my day-to-day life. I can see where people can put up a wall or a barrier and a suspension of belief, and it's not my job to challenge that, right? Everybody's in a situation in the United States to where you can dance with the one that brung you, as they say. You know what I mean? It's like whatever floats your boat, as long as you're not, spilling into somebody else's lane, right?
Yeah.
Have at it, right?
Sure.
From Satanism on down, right? My point is, if you come straight up at me and tell me that you hail Lucifer, I respect that, and now I know to not fuck with you.
Okay.
And it's the same thing with a white nationalist. If somebody tells me, you know what, I don't want to be around any black motherfuckers at all, if they can tell me that, I'm like, God bless you. We're out.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because it's the ones that bother me are the ones that are undercover.
Yeah.
You dig what I mean? Or the ones that are what I call two-faced. Right? It's like you treat me with all the respect in your world, but when you get around with your boys and somebody drops the N-bomb, you think that shit is funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, see, and that's my problem. That's my problem with what I call white America, is that it's too covert in its social sensibilities for the average individual to feel completely secure in their moral integrity. Right? Now, we are all flawed, myself included, and I've interviewed with you and I've told you, this, I've run through the pharmacological index. You dig what I mean? I've been there, did that, got all the t-shirts.
You were in a glam rock band in the 70s, dude. You don't need to say anymore. We know what's going on.
My point is, by no means am I trying to sound pious.
Yeah.
Because if it's predicated on experience, it's like my feet are as muddy as mud can get. You dig what I mean?
Right. But to me, I would take the word of a person who's lived the whole life and says, like, hey, you know what? I opened my Christ mind more than I would to someone that doesn't know anything and follows a dogma without any sort of epiphany or actual connection with the teachings.
Well, Little Richard struggled with that.
Yeah.
When I say struggled, I mean, because, see, now we're of the mindset to where it's like you can have both. You can have a Christ mind and be a bad motherfucker. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like one doesn't have to cancel the other thing out. Once you step outside of that, what I call that puritanical box,
yeah,
right? Like once you get into that shit, that, that situation where it's like, oh my God, you have to be like a fucking... What am I thinking about? Like not the Pilgrims.
No, but the Puritans. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Where you're saying that people are witches because they look funny and you're killing them. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm here to tell you, and this is I'm not trying to really turn this into some sort of religious diatribe or something like that. But the idea is, we are in a spiritual vacuum by and large. My feeling about the upheaval in the nation is that our moral compass has been eroded gradually over time. See, I mean, I was raised, despite all the colorful things that I tell you about my family, right? We were God-fearing people that went to church to try to be better people. And that's the whole idea. Like, I always look at the idea of church as a community opportunity for everybody to kind of like wash their hands of the mistakes that they made and try to do better. And you have like a reboot, right?
That's why you go every Sunday.
There's no angels walking on earth.
No.
You feel me?
Yes, sir.
And the more that a person presents themselves as above it all, that's the motherfucker you got to watch the hardest.
Totally.
You dig what I mean?
Yeah, I've been a big believer in that for a long time.
And so that's my point. There's a certain community that extended into the same context of the music communities, right? So look, I'm telling you that the whole dichotomy of religion itself has been misused, misappropriated, and abused and injected into the psyche of the black consciousness as a tool, right? Because it was used to kind of like mitigate slaves. Yeah, we can treat you like shit right now, but you just be a good boy. You're going to be going to heaven. And it's all going to be good. So just hang in there and be a good boy and pick that cotton and lift that bale. Right? Like that's
You'll
the
get to
thing.
heaven. Don't worry about now.
Slave masters did not want, well, I put it this way. They used religion as a poker chip. Okay, we'll work you like a fucking dog, Monday through Saturday. Sunday, you get to have a little church. And then the preacher, whoever that was designated to be, was basically one of the quote-unquote house Negroes. You know what I mean? That was used as a spy, right?
Mm-hmm.
To report back to the master,
Yep.
who was plotting the breakout,
Yeah.
right? Because trust and believe, there's another side to that. And we're going to go deeper on this lane, right? See, black Americans suffer from post-traumatic slave disorder, brother.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I'm not saying that to be glib.
No.
The reason I wanted you to see Out of Darkness first was to establish in your mind what's in my mind as the biggest egregious disrespect to the black culture, which is to say to keep them ignorant and obfuscated away from the fact that the value of the black mentality was apex.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to call this session,
Black
is the apex, right? Because if you just look at from an artistic standpoint, right? Like black is the purest color and everything else is a derivative of that.
Yeah.
Right? When you get down into the, anthropology of the black culture and you understand that the Kemets, right, is a civilization that predated the Egyptian,
Right.
Memphis,
Yeah.
pyramids, and pharaohs by 1,000 years, and had already, mastered the concepts of mathematics, architecture, extraterrestrial positionings,
Medicine.
medicine. And again, at the risk of putting myself into a fringe category, right? I'm completely in alignment with the idea that the human species is a byproduct of extraterrestrial intervention in the first place. That's just not lost on me. When you look at the magnitude as we know it from the discoveries of the Hubble telescope, etc., right?
Yeah.
When you're looking at the concept of a billion galaxies, right, in the universe.
Yeah.
This is the only thing that's got intelligent life on it?
I don't think so.
Does that really hold water for you?
No.
It's counterintuitive if you know anything about nature itself, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, when you start to dig down into, right, like the libraries of Alexandria, right? Like when Rome burned,
Uh-huh.
can you imagine the amount of anthropological information
That was lost. Yeah.
that was lost?
Well, there was, yeah.
So therefore, where I'm going with this was, when I'm a young boy and I'm starting my school seasons, right? By the time I'm out of the so-called cotton candy aspect of like kindergarten, first grade, and it's all about, warm and fuzzy shit. By the time we get to history in junior high school, as far back as I can see, all they want to tell me first is that I'm from a slave culture.
Yeah.
That's it. That's my set point.
Yeah.
And the understanding is that all the progress that we've made since slave culture, right? Slow as it's been in coming, right? We're in a much better socio-cultural position than we were then. So we should be happy, right? To where we've got like a chicken in every pot, as they say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That whole American dream, white picket fence, You dig what I mean? Like that whole thing, right? Like, but I literally am a byproduct of that brainwashing technique, right? They also tried to tell me I could survive a nuclear holocaust if I jumped under my fucking desk.
Like that's gonna stop it.
you know so as I'm saying,
shit.
Uh-oh.
That's right. I'll clean it up in a bit.
I just don't want you to hurt yourself.
No, I'm all right.
I see you got a power strip over there.
Will you stop that real fast?
I will. 1 second.
And we're back. All right. Sorry, I spilled my water. Do you remember where you were? I like that we didn't say anything while I cleaned it up. We stayed in the same place.
No, well, we were talking about the idyllic presets of the 50s. You know what I'm saying? The early 60s, right? My point being is that we were talking about spiritual vacuums more so than anything else, right? I was raised with a real strong instinct for what is right, what is wrong. I think we all have, that internal, metric.
Yeah.
It's called your conscience.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And as a child, you kind of go through these processes where you understand where you're really trying to explore things, right? It's like one time I had a bad incident where for some reason, I got mad and I threw something at my pet. And it cut him, and I almost lost my mind, right? Because I wasn't trying to hurt the dog. I was trying to get the dog to go catch this thing.
Oh, right.
Right.
It's an accidental.
And it hit him, and he whelped, and a little bit of blood come up. I mean, it wasn't like a fatal blow or anything like that, but it devastated me.
Yeah.
Which is it's reflexive, is what I'm saying. Right? So just like when you were talking about the scene that impacted you during the Great Santini, it's like I remember very early on watching a Twilight Zone episode about some kid that had been bullied, and he had been kind of like rat-packed by a bunch of older kids, and of course he came back. I can't remember the full line of the episode, but he came back with some sort of psychic power to exact like revenge on all of these kids. But just watching I'm talking about as a young boy, I probably was like, 5, 6 years old, like I was young, right? And I remember watching these TV shows, these Westerns, Gunsmoke, Maverick, Bonanza. Rifleman. And there was just so much fighting, fist fights, you know what I mean? And I just remember being very traumatized as a young kid by the time that anytime I would see somebody that seemed like they were excessively pummeled, especially if there was like indications of, because TV then was so freaking soft, like compared to now, right? It's like you didn't have any. Oh my God, can you imagine being a little kid watching The Walking Dead,
or even like just major mainstream stuff like SVU? Law and Order SVU, like, this 5-year-old was raped repeatedly anally by her father.
Oh my God,
like,
I'm just,
whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, I've gone from like this kind of sheltered, somewhat buffered, sensibility about like what is violence, what is right and wrong, to the point to where we are now, to where it's like, you could dismember an individual, in primetime television, and it's not considered FCC. It's not going to be banned.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm saying our moral psychological sensibilities have been so mutated, over time, and there's like little or no regard to what I call the center of gravity. Like where is the middle? The middle used to be like right there.
Right.
Now it's a complete blur.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm from the era where we used to really enjoy like listening to like these public broadcasts by like the Reverend Billy Graham.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that used to be what we call a must see TV.
Yeah.
Stop the clock. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like everybody's like dialed into this thing, at least most people, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the way that he addressed it, it kind of gave you a sensibility that, you know, if you just follow God's word and do these things, you know, in a specific way, you know, behave in a certain way, you know what I'm saying, that you will be supported and you will be emotionally, you know, in an elevated state, right? Well, I can only tell you this, Johnny. You know, if I had to evacuate one of the Land Rovers, like at the beach of Normandy, I might lose my religion right then and there. If I had to be one of those guys like storming that beach, like in Saving Private Ryan, right? Like, to me, that's one of the greatest pieces of film I've ever seen.
That opening scene where they,
yeah, because that, for me, you know, and I'm talking about like being a kid, the byproduct of like the John Wayne era.
It doesn't look cool at all. No, I know exactly what you mean. I've said that a lot, like the difference in like what we grew up watching, those John Wayne movies. Someone got shot and was like, "Give me a cigarette, Charlie. Tell Sarge I'm still," you know what I mean? It was always like that, but like in that one has that scene where that guy's fucking arm gets blown off and he's totally in shock, just walking around holding his dismembered arm. That's what war is more like than John Wayne or.
My point being, right?
Yeah.
It's like there are these prisms of perception,
right?
That we are mass hypnotized by the mass media in this day, like no other time before us. I mean, people watch television because they didn't want to be bored, but back in those good old days, people did a whole lot of other different shit than just sit home and watch TV. Yeah. You were really out doing shit. Yeah. People were going to whatever, their regular Thursday night, Wednesday night card game, their poker game, their bowling alley. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Of course, you had the movies, which were cheap as hell back then, so everybody could go. You know what I mean? You could go to the movies, take fucking 6 people to the movies for $5.
Yeah. Yeah.
With refreshments.
Yeah.
My point being is that, you know, when everybody's kind of on a level playing field economically, right? It's like you don't mind the movie stars being richer than you, and you don't mind the athletes being richer than you, as long as you're not poor.
Right.
You get what I'm trying to say?
Exactly.
And so I never felt destitute, you know, as a result of that. I mean, my point being is that I would love to, nobody loved Leave It to Beaver like more than me, right? Beaver didn't have no black friends.
He actually had a friend named Whitey.
He had a friend named Whitey for damn sure, but he didn't have any black friends.
Right.
But that didn't keep me from wanting to be Beaver's friend.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because he seemed like he was having a lot of fun, even though he's getting in trouble and shit. As long as he could stay away from Wally, he'd be good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Nobody loved I Love Lucy more than me. Like that was my bomb, you know? Like I Love Lucy. I lived for that show.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And Lucy didn't have any black friends.
No.
She was married to a really cool
Cuban dude.
Latin lover. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Desi Arnaz was like my dude. You know what I mean? Like he was right there with Elvis for me.
Yeah.
As far as being cool.
Yeah.
And then when Little Ricky got that drum set, it was all over. You know, because that's when I wanted to play drums. So when I saw little Ricky playing drums, I was like, "What? Is going, Mom?
Yeah,
I need to have this drum set. This is what's going on."
It was Little Ricky.
Little Ricky, right? I watched all that shit, man. You know, My Three Sons.
Yeah.
Bewitched. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
None of these people had black friends.
No.
On TV.
No, you didn't see yourself on TV.
You know, and it just didn't really dawn on me until like Uhura on like Star Trek.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like when she popped up, and oh my God, when I Spy came out with Bill Cosby and Robert Culp. Oh, now we're on a whole nother wavelength. You dig what I mean? Yeah. So, look, I know I'm drifting and pontificating. What I'm trying to tell you is this. I was completely open-minded to the idea that at some point in time, I was going to have the same sort of what I call nice, idyllic lifestyle as I was watching these other white families enjoy on television. You know, my mother was a great homemaker,
Right.
but she was a career woman.
Right.
So I was kind of a latchkey kid as I got a little deeper into my early schooling.
Right.
As the oldest of four, I had responsibilities to kind of assist my mother with the well-being of my siblings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was domesticated, meaning that I learned how to wash the dishes. I
Right.
learned how to vacuum. I learned how to make the beds. I couldn't come
The
here.
chores.
I couldn't come here without making my bed. You know
Right.
what I mean? And my point is, and these are all great things, but the sensibility of saying, okay, well, how do you bridge that gap from like my day to day? And then we fast forward to 1964, Ed Sullivan's show, Here Comes the Beatles, right? It's like, oh my God, you know, look at that. I want to do that, right? Like,
Yeah.
how can I do that? There's no blueprint, right?
Right.
There's no YouTube.
No.
There's no podcast.
No.
There's no nothing. This is a big vacuum
Yeah.
between these four guys with long hair in these really cool suits and cool pointy boots
Yeah.
and hundreds of girls chasing them around the streets. It's like, yeah, but I don't know, but I got to find a way to get into that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's how we all started.
So you want to keep an open mind is
Yeah.
what I'm trying to tell you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if I had been closed off with the idea that that door or that pathway was impenetrable, right, I never would have been able to negotiate my way into the Austin music scene,
Right.
right? I had to look at everything as a possibility, right?
Right.
And the only way that I could gain entree into the conversations was to present myself in a way that was non-threatening, but serious, right? And by the same token, be persistent, right? And you had to be patient, right? Because the world doesn't move on your timetable, right? You know, you might want to play in that club, but shit, you know, you got
be a year.
to get in line.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you gotta pay your dues, as they say, right? And at the same time, you know, while you're sleeping or shucking and jiving, somebody else is rehearsing,
Yep.
right? So there's no slipping. You know, you got to constantly keep your edge. And if you're like really dedicated to the craft, that's enough in itself for a while.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like that's what they mean when they say good work is your own reward.
Right.
So I guess what I'm alluding to is that at a certain point in time, it's helpful to have like a really strong spiritual center, right? Because the concept of faith is predicated on the belief that things will eventually move in your direction, right? If your motives are correct or in accordance with the higher power,
Yeah.
right? And if you just want to consider the higher power an energy,
Yeah.
I consider karma to be a real energy.
Yeah.
You see it all the time,
Yeah.
right? And when you understand it to be, let's say, a scientific fact, it's a scientific fact in the way that a black hole is a scientific fact, even though I've never seen a black hole.
Right.
I know that they're there,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And now they've gotten to the point technologically to where they're starting to try to prove the fact that there's actually coexisting parallel universes,
Right.
right? Like there's dimensional vacuums,
Right.
which would explain a lot with regard to the concept of extraterrestrial activity.
And movement. Yeah.
You feel me?
Yeah.
So my point is, if you kind of keep your eyes and ears and mind open like long enough, at some point things start to become justified, or things start to materialize and clarify.
Right.
Right?
Right.
The thing that Martin Luther King was talking about when I was a young boy, I had no concept of the gravitas of that,
Of course.
right? Because I was not missing any meals. I was well fed,
Right.
right? I had met white people that weren't calling me a nigger. I was, you know what I'm saying? Like my hair was not on fire the same way that it would be in the 70s.
Right.
I was just too young because I was too sheltered. I wasn't exposed.
Right.
You know what I mean?
To the real ugliness.
Yeah. And so when I look back in retrospect, I am stunned, you know, at the courage and the bravery and the conviction of that young man, considering that he died at a very tender age. You know what I mean? I mean, he was only... He wasn't 40 years old. You know what I mean?
You're talking about George Floyd.
I'm talking about Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King. I'm sorry, yeah. Okay.
No, but I'm just saying the idea of, you know, putting a whole cultural movement on his back.
Yeah.
And he wasn't moving in a vacuum because he had a lot of help. And he was a really great team builder.
He was.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is exactly kind of where we're at right now, right? In other words, people like to say that there's not a specific black leader. Well, I'll tell you this. There are a lot of them, right? Because it doesn't pay to have just one.
Yeah.
If you put one above the so-called, you know, movement,
Right.
then that individual becomes a target. You feel me? And
Yeah.
I mean, it's been proven time and time and time and time again. You know, Medgar Evers, you know, Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown, you know, Eldridge Cleaver, Angela Davis. Like I said, when you
I learned more about Stokely in the Black Power mixtape,
Right.
Obviously, because he's a guy that they were filming during that time. Can I just tell you, like, when that scene where the lady's interviewing his mom, and he's kind of sitting there, kind of like scoffing. She goes, "You want to do it?" And he comes over, and he asks like this series of 5 questions, and then gets the fucking answer, and then just gives, like, basically drops the mic on the couch and goes back and sits down. If you guys see this documentary, you'll see what I'm saying. But I didn't really. I knew that name a little bit, but I had no idea. And he's an author.
yeah,
I was an author.
yeah. Well, he was a public speaker.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, he was, you know, he was an activist,
Yeah.
right? A young activist, and he was counterintuitive. He was kind of like he was in that area that was like more in alignment with the Nation of Islam than Martin Luther King's nonviolence movement,
Okay, right,
Because that's the thing. Like, your natural inclination is not to sit there and be pummeled, right?
Right.
Your natural inclination is not to just be victimized.
Right.
I mean, that takes a completely different type of mentality to subject yourself to, like, water hoses,
Right.
fucking German shepherds. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, and to do it on more than one occasion, you know? Because if it happened the first time, you might think that was a mistake.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I also in the whitewashing of it, it seems like when somebody, like a white person like me of my age, I'm 51, heard of the Black Panthers, you got a sense that this was a group that was a militant group that was fighting, but when you learn what they did was provide for their community, they were educational, they got people food. It wasn't what I was explained it was.
Exactly.
A threat to our way of life.
Exactly.
So to speak.
Exactly. No, they were essentially a neighborhood watch group. You know?
For them, because no one was fucking watching them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In other words, my point was, if you had a police stop, the Panthers, you know, they kept like a shortwave radio or whatever, you know what I mean? If they knew something was going on in the vicinity that they were patrolling, they'd pull up just to observe. The fact that they would have their arms on display was used as, obviously, you know, a deterrent to say, like, okay, we're just watching.
Right.
But we're good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We're right. We're right here.
The same thing the person with the phone was doing at the George Floyd murder.
Exactly. But see, here's the question you have to ask yourself. At what point were the innocent bystanders really what I call, you know, too afraid or too intimidated to like physically intervene. You know what I'm saying? There's a certain point to where you have to risk your own neck for the higher power.
Yeah.
If you understand what I'm trying to say.
Right.
I'm not casting any aspersions on the people that were filming the thing. And I'm not even trying to deflect in any means, you know, that they were culpable per se. But I'm going to say this way. The Watts riot was ignited by the fact that a traffic stop was poorly or inappropriately initiated, and the innocent bystanders turned over the fucking police car. Like in real time. Like they body slammed a pregnant woman who was protesting the mistreatment of her son in a traffic stop, which is probably predicated on a DWI, right? In other words, he probably should have got the ticket, right? But the way that they accosted the guy, the way that they physically mishandled the guy, right, was inflammatory. Yeah. And if your mama is watching that, she's not going to stand by with her hands in her pocket. No. Right? She's like in your face. Yeah. And so you saw what happened when they were in Buffalo and the old man was, you know, basically, I don't know what he was trying to do, but somehow he got shoved down. Yeah. Okay, well, maybe that was a reflex. But then to walk by in a parade of like 20 officers and just watch his blood flow on the street, what is that? That's not human. No. That's not humanistic. You know, that's not morally correct. So where's the protect and to serve in that? Right. Right? I mean, it's really so layered. It's really so polydynamic that I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. You know what I'm saying? Right. Because, again, like, as smart as I am, I'm not intellectually equipped, you know, to put it in concise terms, right, to where I could give it to you in 25 words or less. Right. If I could, I guess I'd get a Nobel Prize. You know what I mean? Yeah. But what I can tell you is this: the mere fact that I've managed to survive 67 years in the throes of this bullshit, and we're right here. The burning question in the back of my mind is, euphemistically speaking, what took you motherfuckers so long? You dig what I'm saying? Yeah.
And there's one thing, in speaking even to what happened, even though this man is an older white man, it speaks to the heartlessness and inhumane treatment of others by the police because they're in a uniform and we're not. That they were not protecting and serving that dude.
It wasn't reflexive, was it?
No. The one thing that I've seen a lot, and I think that freaks a lot of white people out, is the idea of dismantling the police. And I think what that equals in the average white person's mind is, you mean you don't want police? You know what I mean? And I think that's the fucking mistake, because from what I understand and what I learned from a conversation I had with someone yesterday is that Camden, New Jersey, dismantled their police because they were having too many problems like this. Okay. And they reformed it under a new headspace, to use a hippie term. Right. Having said that, there's some things I want to ask you, because there's some things that I've seen on social media and some things that I've heard from people that I care about. It's but the looting and the destruction. There's a lot of that goes on. A lot of like that. That's where do you what obviously nobody wants that. I'm assuming you don't think people should be out there burning churches.
I can say this straight up. You know, it's like, you know, there's an old coarse expression where it's not good to shit where you eat, right? Mm-hmm. And the bottom line is, at the end of the day, you cut your nose to spite your face. Yeah. Right? See, those are tantrums when you see that happening. Right? This is literally like what a 2-year-old does when he's absolutely not getting that cookie. Right. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, and I'm not making light of it. No. What I can tell you is that it's fun to tear shit up. To be honest with you, I mean, the visceral expression of rage is intoxicating.
Intoxicating. I've been there.
And I know for a fact, because I went through, you know, a series of like what I call anger management therapy sessions, right? for various reasons that I won't disclose right here, but I know what rage feels like.
Yeah.
Right? And it manifests itself in such an unpredictable fashion, right? To where when you hear people use the expression, I just saw red.
Yeah.
That's exactly what's happening. It's like your thought process is just shut down.
Yeah.
You know, and you just go into your lizard brain.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And you fucking just act out in a way to where it just feels great. Like that's the whole concept of the Incredible Hulk is predicated on that.
Right.
When that adrenaline level, you know, hits a certain chemical imbalance,
Yeah.
it feels like the right thing to do.
Yeah.
To beat a motherfucker's ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Because you're in defense mode. Theoretically, it's like defense overdrive.
Right.
Right? It's hard to get that mad when you're not threatened.
Right.
So, you know, when a lady dismembers a guy's penis, I'm not saying she should have did it.
But you can see where she's coming
but
from
I
with
understand.
it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's, you know, when the chick decided she needed to straighten Al Green's ass out with them grits in the bathtub,
Yeah.
I'm not saying she should have done that, but I think I understand.
Yeah.
Right? My point is that is why we have police. Is because people will lose control.
Yeah.
And the police is supposed to be the, you know, what I call the higher elevated conscious of the community.
Yeah.
Right? They're supposed to be able to diffuse a situation before it becomes inextricable, right? Before it becomes irreversible, before it becomes dangerous. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I know what it is. You know, I had a familial tragedy, and my mother shot and killed my father. You know, I wasn't there to witness this, so I couldn't really tell you, you know, what the surrounding events were all predicated upon, because I only had her testimony at the end of the day, right? I don't want to unpack that here, but my point is that's also the reason that I don't carry a firearm I don't maintain a firearm in my household.
So you won't shoot someone.
Well, I know me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I know enough about me to know that theoretically, you know, it's not uncommon to think that if somebody is pushed into a certain situation that seems intractable, then they're going to take the most drastic measure available to them. Right. It's called survival.
Yeah.
Right.
It's one of those things where when my grandpa passed away a few years ago, he had a massive collection of guns, and my cousin kind of had some, and he was like, well, do you want one of these? And I was like, in theory, I totally do, but I don't want it in my house. And he was like, why not? And I was like, because I won't shoot someone if I don't have a gun.
That's exactly right. That's
It's not an option.
Right. That's right. That's exactly right. And
not that I think I will, but I'm eliminating it.
But I guess, let's say, just tipping back to your set point, doesn't it strike you as odd that Martin Luther King was able to maintain his composure in all of his, you know, interactions, especially like his public interactions?
Yeah.
And don't you think that he had moments where he was punching walls?
Oh, totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Because this is what a human being would have to do. You'd have to diffuse, you'd have to release it someplace, right? He certainly wasn't guilty of domestic violence. You know, he didn't exact it on his wife and children by any accounts. You know what I'm saying?
No.
But it had to go someplace, right? And of course, you know, obviously he had his sidebar dalliances, you know, with whatever, you know.
And we only know that because he was a threat to the American government, so they had him followed all the time.
Well, yeah, my point is that we're all human, going right back to what I'm trying to say.
We all have faults.
If you want to get on that white carpet, be my guest, you know, because I guarantee you we'll find molecular matter that's not the most tasteful on display.
Yeah.
You know, we've all got those skeletons in our closets.
Yeah.
And that's not even the point.
Right.
The point is, I'm sitting here with you because you gave me a space to give you some perspective that you can share with your family, your friends, your colleagues, and the general public, you know, as a byproduct, right? But the thing that I want you to walk away with is the fact that just the way that I've been feeding you teasers, or little what I call, breadcrumbs, you know. I'm trying to show you, like, there's information here, there's information there, there's information everywhere.
Yeah.
There's information available, right? You don't have to be what I call a Karen, right? You don't have to be one of these people that's
still
running.
don't even know what that is.
That's a lady that's like clutching her pearls because she's got this such a high level of like white entitlement.
Okay, no, okay.
Right? That's the lady that was like trying to call the police. She had the dog.
Yeah. Oh, right. Karen. Okay. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Her name was Amy.
But
we call that behavior a Karen.
Okay.
Just like we call the individuals that are kind of like the guys running around in fucking camo all the time and they've got 25 guns in their fucking locker and shit like that. We call them Brad.
That's a great name. Sorry, let's go. Let's stay in this. So you came here to tell me
that you can self-educate.
Yeah.
That you don't need to basically become just a what I call an emotional leech.
Right.
On every black person that you know.
Right.
To get lit, to get woke.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like if you really are interested in being woke, then invest your time away from the Kardashians long enough to maybe get into some James Baldwin.
Right.
Right? Divest yourself away from TikTok, you know what I'm saying? And get your ass into some Cornel West or, Michael Eric Dyson, or any number of, once you plug into one, the beauty of the algorithm of YouTube is they show you things that are alike or the same things that are in the same intellectual stream.
Right.
Right? And you can just like you popped into Amazon, you got a whole library.
Yeah.
Right? You can do 10 years of fucking research in 10 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
You feel me?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't change you, well, then at least you gave it a shot. Right? Like, in other words, I'm not judging you if you don't walk away with a different opinion. I just find it extremely difficult not to be changed.
I find it very difficult
not to be changed if you don't receive the right injection of information.
Right.
And it's all about the exposure. So this is what I'm trying to tell you. It's like the reform has to be on multiple platforms. It certainly needs to be at an economic level because once you take the stress of survival away from an individual, they can spend more time in education.
Yeah.
The reason I'm so saturated in self-education now is because I'm trying to make up for lost time that I applied to my musical ambitions and my musical career. Because you just couldn't have it like both ways. I probably did have the aptitude to where I probably would have been a pretty good scholastic success, if I'd followed my inclination towards architecture instead of deviating into fucking rock and roll.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But hey, I didn't know any architects that were as cool as Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
I didn't know any architects that were getting paid like Sly Stone.
Right.
You dig what I mean?
Yeah.
So it didn't seem like the worst bet.
No.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I did the little, what I call metric juggling of like, well, let's see, one from column A, one from column B. Which ones are getting laid the most? I think I'm going to go with
There's still the decisions made by a young man
aren't
always the most
so I jest with that. But what I'm trying to say is in retrospect, there's the old expression, the unexamined life is not worth living. Right?
Yeah.
You literally have to take a good, hard, pensive, introspective look at yourself as an individual.
Yeah.
And ask yourself, like, am I left of center? Am I in the middle? Do I have work to do? We all have work to do.
We all have work to do.
I've got more work to do. You know what I mean? And I'm trying to use my intellect in a way that's not arrogant. Right? I'm trying to, because people are theoretically starting to look at me as like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like a mentor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've looked at you even way before this as that myself. Like that's my sort of, I have a dad that didn't teach me anything and we don't even talk now, and my course of my life has been finding big brothers to help me through, and that's what's gotten me through everything. And it's up to, in my life, I look up to you and have since I've met you, and it's funny when I was talking to to Jonathan Horseman about this, he was like, I kind of feel like now I'm just explaining shit to white people a lot, and I understand, I understand, but the thing is like, until everybody knows firsthand from somebody who has lived the experience and can talk about it honestly, then we don't really know what's going on. These aren't things that we, you know what I mean? The depth of it all and the systemic nature of it all is frightening, but there's no way to really see it unless someone shows you how it works, and there's no way to really know that except for from firsthand experience.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's, it's basically like a tribal tradition. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'll say this in a way that I really want it to resonate with gravitas. America is a country operating on a guilt trip, right? In other words, and until they develop, I say they, until the government develops an empathetic conscience that's really first willing to apologize for all the egregious injustices that is wrought upon the Native American indigenous cultures and the African cultures in that order. To me, it's like a karmic debt. It's like our country is suffering an egregious disease, because of a karmic impact, right? It's like you cannot decimate a complete civilization of a rich, deep culture. Do you have any idea how old the American indigenous culture is? Right? It's eons,
Ancient, yeah.
eons, bro.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, what you can discover about, let's just take if you get into the specificity of the different tribal, traditions and so on and so forth, it's a cornucopia, it's a whole nother, you need a whole nother spectrum of investment, right, to get to the point to where I could be conversing about it the way that I'm conversing about the black struggle, right? But I have, a Native American genealogy in my DNA. I know that for a fact, Navajo.
It seems like what I learned from Out of Darkness that I guess a lot of African Americans in America that came here in the time of the Moors.
Absolutely.
When those guys discovered the stars and also those currents.
Absolutely.
That's pretty brilliant.
You
by
feel
the
me?
way. Yeah.
Yeah. That's my point. You know that there were all throughout the regions around like Florida and Georgia and Alabama, they were like, they were like cities.
Yeah.
Cities.
Yeah.
The way that we perceive like the Incas or the Mayas, down in Mexico or down in Peru and whatnot. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It's like, man, the earth is old, bro. Yeah. It is ancient.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like civilization is rich. Rich.
Yeah.
And this thing that we're doing that's only been in existence a couple of 100 years is a speck in the spectrum of time.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you've got galaxies that are like 1 million light years from here that you can see with this technology that we're using. What you're basically, all you're doing is you're looking into the past, right? Because everything that we can see happened like thousands and thousands of years ago. If you can see it, if you can take a snapshot of it and put it on a Google picture, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this is why I'm so adamant about the fact that there has to be like some form of spiritual connectivity to a lucid consciousness. And I'm not saying that you have to bow down to a Catholic ideology or a Baptist ideology or even for that matter a Muslim ideology or a Buddhist ideology or whatever, but you got to believe in something
bigger than us,
because we're not shit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like George Clinton used a phrase that I never forgot. It's like, we're just a biological speculation sitting here vibrating, but we don't know what we're vibrating about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, Elvis Costello said it all. I don't hear this song often enough. Like, what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? Like, You know, I mean, it should be like right up there with Imagine, right?
Yeah.
In terms of just saying, you know, Stevie Wonder, Higher Ground,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like, look, man, I mean, musicians are communicators, right?
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be the substitutes for spiritual leaders, right? But we're supposed to basically extend, you know, the voices of like spiritual gravitas.
Yeah.
I mean, people forget Bob Dylan was like at the vanguard
Yeah.
of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
People also, probably a little known fact, that he was deeply in love with Mavis Staples,
Yeah.
right? Like,
She's making that pretty public these days.
well, I'm just saying, he made it public.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, they
yeah.
talk about it in No Direction Home. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just saying, it's one thing to be an entertainer, but you know, as an entertainer, there's only so many hours in the day, you know, and you have to like be very conscientious about how you're going to utilize your time, like organize your time and position your messaging in a way that's earnest and forthright and effective,
Yeah.
right? We're still kind of in what I call a bit of we're still in a bit of a state of shock right now. I don't think everybody's really kind of found their bearings to really get their feet firmly planted, you know what I'm saying, to move their messaging forward. And I think people are very reticent to like just regurgitate some form of, you know, allegiance or, you know, compatibility with the idea that they want to be involved, because there's this thing that am very sensitive to called coattailing, right?
Right. Exactly.
When I used to manage Living Color, you know, we had a song. They had done a revision of a song called "Who Shot You" by the Notorious B.I.G.
Mm-hmm.
and they reconfigured it into a hard rock setting,
Right.
right? And it was pertinent because it was right in alignment with like the Ferguson uprising,
Right.
right? And I love the way that they did it. It was a beautiful, you know, it was a beautiful rendition and a transformation, you know, because Big's version was basically kind of like a street swagger confrontational thing between him and another like drug dealer. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, and the way that Living Color positioned it, they made it a situation against the Black American society against the police.
Yeah.
And black on black crime. In other words, we're equally sensitive to the idea of, you know, the way that the manifestations of low self-esteem have created a platform to facilitate gang warfare.
Yeah.
Gang warfare was a machination essentially perpetuated by the CIA. The COINTELPRO program that I mentioned to you maybe previously before.
Uh-huh.
They talk about it in Black Power Mixtape, right? It was basically a situation where I left Los Angeles around 1968.
Mm-hmm.
And then by 1970 was when you started to have the emergence of the Crips and the Bloods.
Okay.
Prior to the polemic between the Crips and the Bloods, like all of South Central Los Angeles was fragmented by like neighborhood watch gangs.
Yeah.
We all had our shit. So my territory was called the Slossons, right? And to the east of us was like the Del Vikings. And to the west of us was like the Businessmen. And then further south was like, you know.
That was a gang, the business.
Oh, there was like 10 of them.
Great gang.
Oh,
It's a really funny name for
there was
a gang.
10 of them.
Yeah.
You know. And they all started out ostensibly as car clubs.
Okay.
Right? They started out as car clubs
Right.
because, you know, you had so many of the veterans of World War II came back with mechanical skills.
Right.
They had the GI Bill, and they got into hot rodding.
Right. And that exploded in Southern California.
But see, the thing was, there used to be these white gangs from like the beach, from like, you know, Pasadena and, you know, Riverside and Covina and places like that. And they had these little fucking splinter cells called the Bounty Hunters. And their thing was hunting black people for sport. So that's where the black gangs really became like what I call a protective neighborhood watch initiative, like a militia, right?
Yeah.
Now, during those times, because we're talking about like from the 50s into the 60s, right? But yeah, I mean, there would be like these, you know, everybody thinks about California's fun in the sun and all of that shit, and that's true. But there's racists in Southern California just like every place else.
Sure.
You dig what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff was exacerbated by intramural sports, and you wouldn't see like a high level of like interracial violence until you saw like high school football games, high school basketball games, depending on who won, which was usually the black team.
School. Yeah, yeah.
Shit would pop off.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally, yeah.
And of course, like I said before, you know, the thing about racism, it tends to operate under a veil of darkness, right? In other words, if the visiting white school students would come to the black school and they lost, those visitors wouldn't get attacked.
Right.
It would only be a situation if the visiting black school went to a white community and won, then they would get attacked.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's what seeds the animosity, right? That's where the rot starts to foment.
Right.
You get what I'm trying to say?
Totally.
Well, brother, you know, when you take that as part and parcel, as if you were into forestry, or if you were really kind of, if you grew up in a agricultural or a wilderness setting, right? You kind of learn like what plants are poisonous and what plants are benign.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
In the city, right? You kind of figure out like what neighborhoods are toxic, what neighborhoods are benign, right? And even among visiting black neighborhoods or rivaling black neighborhoods, a lot of that shit was really just seated in whose high school was doing the most damage.
Right. Right.
You know, if it was Fremont High School, that was the high school in my neighborhood. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That was a badass high school. You know what I mean? That was a notoriously badass high school.
Do you find that, I'm sorry to take you out of this about the high school thing, but do you find that maybe when the violence did take place and there was black on black violence, that coincided with the introduction of crack into those neighborhoods?
Well, it exacerbated it. You know, there's always been, let's be real, there's always been black on black crime.
Well, there's white on white crime. There's but what I mean is like at the level that is alarming.
But see, the COINTELPRO thing was designed as a genocidal agenda, right? Like it was set up to pit, because they introduced guns along with the drugs.
Right.
Right. Did you ever see the TV show that was on FX for a 3 seasons called Snowfall?
No.
Google that shit.
Okay.
Right? Because it tells you the whole story.
Yeah.
Of the infusion of crack cocaine into the South Central.
Oh, I heard about this and read about
It's
it.
an awesome fucking show.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Because they broke it down and they didn't cut any corners. You know, they didn't mollify it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing. So they set up, you know, a few key individuals to be like kingpins, right? Like fiefdoms, right?
Right.
So when you hear about this guy, Freeway Ricky Ross, right? He was like the guy it was coming like straight from the fucking CIA. He's getting fucking kilos.
Right.
And then it started to become like pallets of kilos.
Right.
Then it started to become tons of kilos.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And he eventually wound up, you know, because he was operating with some level of immunity up to a certain point. But then, you know, warring factions got out of pocket. And once you started to do the business of like sweeping up everybody into the prison industrial complex, which is a whole nother conversation. We need another show.
Yeah, a whole other show.
Just to dig into that shit.
Yeah.
You dig what I mean? But once people start to get scrutinized under legal pressure, and they started, you know, basically cracking and giving each other up. You know what I mean? The whole idea was to, when they got into the whole business of saying that, you know, if you had basically a marginal amount of cocaine that you could get, an egregious like 30-year drug sentence for it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then they created a product that was so immediately addictive, right?
Yeah.
That it was designed to do just that. So they essentially created like a roach motel.
Yeah.
You dig what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. I've seen in documentaries where they show the newscasts about there's a new drug in town and it's a quarter of the price of cocaine and it gets you higher than like 10 times. Like it's basically a fucking commercial for it.
Yeah, like a PSA.
Like the news reports were like definitely almost like selling it to somebody who was like having a coke problem as it was. It was like, oh, this will make me high for longer.
Well, black community couldn't afford like grams of cocaine during those times. We were talking about in the early 70s, right? So when you take something and make it like 10 times more potent and it becomes like 10 times cheaper.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
That's the magic formula for disaster.
Yeah.
Right? And so then the turf wars that ensued, right, were the things that proliferated, because then you start to have like multiple factions of Crips and Bloods.
Right.
Right? So you wind up with, and I'll send you like a documentary about that shit if you want to get deeper into it.
Look, I'm your suggestions have been amazing so far. And I really appreciate you taking the time to concern yourself with making sure that I understand what it is that I'm trying to understand. Does that make sense?
Well, of course. And that's my point. I mean, I see your forum, as an opportunity to extend knowledge across the board. Yeah. I mean, I'm not looking at myself as like the avatar of, information highway.
No, but the thing is that we're trying to solve a problem that the first step is communication and learning exactly what the problem is. Yeah. And hearing it firsthand, because as white people, we're shielded from the problem. And then it's easy for us to always look away from it.
Well, yeah, I mean, and if we're going to be honest, you're also like instigators.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, just because I'm talking to you doesn't mean that, 10 people in your circle aren't culpable.
Right.
You dig what I mean?
Right. Because
my point is, it's just like we were talking about the cops that were like the accessories to the murder, right? If you're not trying to stop this shit, you're perpetuating this shit.
Yeah.
And it's like you can't just be outraged. You can't cherry pick outrage. Right. Is what I'm trying to tell you.
Of course.
You can't be less outraged by Sandra Bland than you are about George Floyd.
Right.
This chick got pulled over for a fucking taillight.
Yeah. And
didn't survive a weekend in fucking jail.
Yeah.
I've been strip searched in so many small towns in East and West Texas during my 5-year career with Franklin's Mast that people think I'm making that shit up. They just would think like, oh, you got to be lying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The only people that know are like Jimmy Siraj, my sidekick, because he was getting fucked with right there with me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there was no internet. There was no cell phones.
No,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so I'm telling you this shit, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess you saw, fucking UFOs at the same time, right? All that shit. It's like, yeah, man.
Well,
okay.
I think that it's important to hear this from every person so that it's reinforced. So that those that don't believe it understand that it is a real thing.
Johnny, I got picked up in like 1979. I got picked up and held in detention for 24 hours on a case of mistaken identity right here in Austin. Yeah. Because I wouldn't divulge my name. I was just coming back from a grocery store, and they pull up and roll up on me, and essentially kidnap me.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And I didn't have an attorney in my back pocket.
No.
Right? But I knew I hadn't done a damn thing wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And so I wasn't about to divulge some information to them until they gave me a good damn reason as to why are you stopping me in the first damn place.
Which is your right as an American citizen.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
They took an oath to uphold those rights for you.
Right. But I'm saying that this was not back in the 50s, and this was not back in the fucking 60s.
No, it's still happening. Do you ever watch Seth Meyers?
Of course.
Okay, do you know Amber? I'm spacing on her last name. every day this week they've opened the show with her telling a different story about getting shaken down from the cops or by the cops.
Yeah, well,
And I mean, it's happened to every person of color,
I mean, again, I'm also from the generation where you would get shaken down for having long hair in general. Just being an Anglo person with long hair was just enough. Being a hippie or whatever they considered the issue to be. You know what I'm saying? So that was the thing that always fueled me. Like I told you in our last sessions, it's like, look, the more I was antagonized, the wilder I wanted to be, the more I wanted to resist, the more I wanted to exert my human right to be me. You know what I'm saying? And my voice just got louder. That's what happened with Tupac Shakur.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, it started out with him basically being, maliciously arrested with excessive force, lost some front teeth, filed a civil suit against the city of Oakland, and won. So, you fast forward to the point, considering the fact that he had the upbringing of a Black Panther member. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was a bona fide Black Panther. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So he was what I call correctly indoctrinated from childhood.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to tell you is that was the whole point of the Black Panther Party.
Yeah.
Stop feeding this garbage to these young black minds that you're fucking subservient slaves, and start to tell them that you guys were kings and queens. At a certain juncture in historical history, you were the rulers of the intellectual world.
Yeah.
While these other, while these other peripheral, civilizations were still in their formative years,
Right.
Or to put it bluntly, while these white motherfuckers were still in caves,
Yeah. Yeah.
You were fucking building pyramids.
Yeah.
You dig what I mean? It's like
totally.
Yeah. So, anyway,
is there as we sort of come to the close of this, because you and I can go on forever.
Well, there'll be another day if we need it.
I think it's definitely worth it. Definitely bringing you back. As far as I'm trying to sort of end these with what can we do?
Okay.
Right now, what can you do as a person listening to this? And I've gotten hip to a couple of great places that if you have the money to donate, the Austin Justice Coalition, do you know this?
Okay.
And the Austin Black Lives Matter. Is there any other place where people can put their money where their mouth is to reform?
I would say this. I mean, if you're looking for that, Black Lives Matter is the hub, right? Like, I mean, it's the compendium repository of all of the annex, proactive resources. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or initiatives that have been vetted.
Yeah.
Right. That have been vetted to be, legitimate and effective. Right. So I would just say use that as your principal source. I would say also go to the Smithsonian Museum of African American History, right? Just find their link online, right? I'm sure you'll find, again, another wellspring, a plethora of deep knowledge, that you can educate yourself in a systemic fashion. Because again, I would just say to my colleagues of lighter pigmentation or lack of melanin, the non-melanated brothers, as they say, I would say, check this out. If you just devote or make a pledge to yourself to devote, 1/10 of your viewing time to educational material that you can access easily on YouTube or Amazon Prime for that matter, especially while Amazon Prime is kind of in their kind of fixed position. This is a really great opportunity because you don't have to do like a lot of cut and paste super fishing. You can just get in there and just kind of like start to go right down the list, right, to get the perspective. But the other thing is they can just listen to you as you continue to build your, index and your
listen to the show and listen to you and other people like you.
you know, because I'm going to continue to feed your head
Yeah.
as I continue to feed my head.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm discovering things all the time that I just wasn't privy to. Like one tidbit that struck me, John Henrik Clark, you know, a noted anthropological PhD, African American professor, said that in the African dialect, the word race does not even exist. In other words, it wasn't even a concept. Any foreigners were considered visitors.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, how deep is that?
Super deep. I'll put some links to the documentaries on there.
And I'll say this one other thing before we go.
Yeah.
If you want to think in terms of like superiority, in other words, if there is such a construct as superiority predicated on higher moral ground,
Yeah.
the black race, right, is so much more forgiving, right,
Obviously. Yeah.
of its aggressors,
Yeah.
disproportionate, you know, to any other, you know, situation that you could probably find in civilization, period.
Yeah.
Right? Because we understand, you know, that the nature of the situation is such that without the leverage of financial and let's say practical, tangible resources, right? We're constantly at a disadvantage because we don't own the real estate to even like isolate ourselves to a position where we could just basically maintain our own utopian concept
Right.
of what a society should look like. Like we have to coexist. We have no choice, right? But to find a way to peacefully coexist. And we have a desire to peacefully coexist in a just and humane setting, right? But just like the inflammatory comment that Kanye West made several months back when he said something to the effect of, you know, well, after 400 years, it seems like slavery had become like a choice. Meaning, and everybody went bananas, you know, when he made the comment.
Yeah,
but the underpinning of what he was alluding to was the idea is that we just went along for 400 years quietly in bondage.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely not true. There were consistent, like, quote unquote, slave uprisings.
Yeah.
Because who in their right humanistic mind wants to live perpetually in that state of being?
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I got a Chihuahua. And I can dominate the hell out of that little 3-pound Chihuahua.
Yeah.
But trust and believe, if I'm not holding her the right way, she's not having it.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm trying to tell you?
Yeah. Exactly.
So the idea is this, man. It's like we've died in every major national conflict, you know, every world war, civil war. Black people were fighting in the Civil War, obviously, because they had a vested interest, right? But after all of that, and after the aftermath of like 750,000 Americans dead and buried, right? More people died in the Civil War than all of the other, you know, international conflagrations combined.
Right.
You understand what I mean? The concept of like white supremacy is so deeply ingrained into the fabric of this governmental construct that it has to be dismantled. It has to be disassembled.
Right.
Right? In other words, it has to be rebuilt. The same way that you take an engine and tear it down to the block and then rebuild it to be stronger and better is where we are right now.
Yeah.
We have to do it.
Yeah.
And it's this generation that has to take the full mantle of responsibility to make sure that it gets done.
It's a lot of work and it's uncomfortable, but if it's not done, we're never going to take a step.
They painted that big ass display of Black Lives Matter down, you know, that boulevard in Washington, D.C., right? That's a sentiment.
Yeah.
But that's not the work.
Yeah.
Right? The work is inside of those buildings.
Yeah.
Right? And we've got to get this maniac,
Yeah.
you know, out of the position to obstruct progress and change.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it with you right there.
All right. I love you, Bevis.
I love you too, Johnny.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Hit that stop. Yeah.
And sorry about the bad words.